It's the summer of 1962. The woman who answers is the most photographed face on the planet. Within hours, she will be dead. And for more than 60 years, the world has been told a simple story. Sleeping pills, a tragic accident, a star who burned too bright and flickered out, alone. But here's what most people don't know. The last voice she heard on that phone has never fully explained what she said to him. The housekeeper who raised the alarm changed her story not once, but multiple times. And decades later, a man claiming to have secret tapes of her final therapy sessions walked into the spotlight and set off a fight that is still not resolved today. This is not a rumor video. Every name, every timeline, every controversy you're about to hear is documented, argued over by biographers, investigators, and journalists for over half a century. And when you put the pieces together in order, the official story starts to wobble. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why the death of Marilyn Monroe is still one of the most disputed nights in Hollywood history, and why the people who were actually there have spent their entire lives being asked the same question: what really happened in that house? By the summer of 1962, Marilyn Monroe was not just a movie star. She was a global obsession, a woman whose face sold magazines on every continent, but behind the glamour, her life was falling apart in public view. She had just been fired from her own film, a production called Something's Got to Give, after repeated absences on set. Her marriage to playwright Arthur Miller had ended. Her relationships with powerful men in Washington were reportedly cooling. She was struggling with insomnia so severe that she depended on prescription barbiturates just to sleep through the night. To the outside world, she was untouchable. Inside that house on 5th Helena Drive, she was isolated, medicated, and increasingly alone. And on the night of August 4th, 1962, that isolation would collide with a phone call that has never been fully explained. The man on the other end of that final phone call was Peter Lawford, a British-born actor, a member of Frank Sinatra's famous Inner Circle, and, critically, the brother-in-law of the sitting President of the United States. Lawford was calling to invite Monroe to a small dinner party at his beach house that night. It should have been a normal call between friends. It was anything but. According to accounts given over the years, Monroe's voice was slurred. Her words came slowly, as if she were fighting to stay conscious. And then, according to the story Lawford told for the rest of his life, she said something that has haunted every investigator who has ever studied this case. She told him to say goodbye to his wife, then she told him to say goodbye to the president. And then, almost as an afterthought, she told Lawford to say goodbye to himself, because, in her words, he was a good guy. Then the line went dead. Think about that for a second. A woman who was just referenced saying goodbye to the President of the United States on a phone call hours before she is found dead. If that sentence appeared in any other case file in American history, it would have triggered a full federal investigation on the spot. Lawford reportedly tried calling back. He couldn't get through, and according to people who knew him afterward, this moment never left him. Friends said that whenever Monroe's name came up in later years, he would go quiet. He would change the subject. He carried the weight of that final conversation until his own death decades later, reportedly wondering out loud whether he could have done something differently in those final minutes. But here is the first curiosity gap in this story. Lawford did not call the police immediately. Instead, accounts suggest he first called people connected to his political and entertainment circles to figure out what to do. Precious time passed. Nobody has ever fully accounted for exactly how much. And that single decision to make calls instead of dialing for help is the first domino in a night full of them. While Lawford was on the phone in Malibu, inside the house in Brentwood, a woman named Eunice Murray was the only other adult present. Murray was Monroe's live-in housekeeper, but she wasn't just staff. Investigators have long noted that Murray had personal ties to Monroe's psychiatrist, a connection that would later raise uncomfortable questions about exactly whose interests she was protecting that night. According to Murray's own account, she woke up around 3 in the morning. Something felt wrong. She noticed a light glowing under Monroe's bedroom door. She knocked. No answer. She tried the door. It was locked or blocked from the inside. This is where the story should be simple. A concerned housekeeper, a locked door, a phone call for help. But it isn't simple at all, because over the following decades, Murray told investigators several different versions of what happened next, and how much time actually passed before anyone called for medical help. In some retellings, she panicked immediately and phoned Monroe's psychiatrist within minutes. In others, investigators who later reviewed the case found gaps in the timeline that Murray never adequately explained. Reporters who interviewed her in later life said she seemed to grow more evasive, not less as the years went on, the opposite of what you'd expect from someone with nothing to hide. And then there's the detail that still bothers researchers today. Murray was seen, according to some accounts, doing laundry in the early hours of that morning. Before anyone had confirmed Monroe was dead, why would a housekeeper be doing laundry in the middle of a medical emergency? That single detail has fueled suspicion for over 60 years because it suggests someone may have been cleaning up before the authorities even arrived. Murray never gave a clean, consistent answer to that question for the rest of her life. The person Murray called that night was Dr. Ralph Greason, Monroe's psychiatrist, a man who by this point had become far more than her doctor. Greason had inserted himself deeply into Monroe's personal life, reportedly seeing her almost daily, sometimes multiple times a day, blurring the line between therapist and confidant in a way that colleagues at the time considered highly unusual. When Greason arrived at the house, he did not wait for police or paramedics to break down the door. He grabbed a fireplace poker, broke through the bedroom window himself, and climbed inside. What he found in that room would become the official scene investigators based their entire case on. Monroe was lying face down across the bed. A phone receiver was reportedly in or near her hand, reinforcing the idea that her last act on this earth may have been trying to reach someone. Monroe's personal physician, Dr. Hyman Engelberg, arrived shortly after and pronounced her dead at the scene, in the early hours before dawn. But here is where the timeline becomes genuinely strange. Official police reports list the time of the call to authorities significantly later than Murray's own private accounts of when she first discovered the problem. That gap, sometimes estimated at an hour or more, has never been fully closed. In a death investigation, an unexplained hour is not a footnote. It's everything. It's enough time to make phone calls, move objects, stage a scene, or simply panic and freeze. Nobody who was in that house that night has ever given an account that fully accounts for where that missing time went. The autopsy concluded what the world was told to accept: acute barbiturate poisoning, enough sedative in her system to be fatal. At the coroner's inquest, officials landed on a probable suicide. Notice that word, probable, not certain, not confirmed, probable. That single word has been the crack in the foundation of this case for over 60 years. Investigators at the time noted inconsistencies that never quite fit a simple overdose. There was no glass of water found near the bed, despite Monroe supposedly swallowing dozens of pills. Blood tests showed levels of barbiturates that some medical experts argued were difficult to reconcile with a body that showed no sign of the drug being absorbed through the stomach in the normal way, leading some researchers to suggest the drugs may have entered her system through injection rather than swallowing. If that theory is even partially correct, it changes everything. A woman swallowing pills alone in a moment of despair is one story. A woman receiving a fatal dose by injection is an entirely different, far darker story, one that requires another person in that room. The official investigation in 1962 did not pursue that theory aggressively. Critics have argued for decades that the case was closed faster, and with less scrutiny, than the surrounding facts justified. Now here is where this story takes its most explosive turn, the part of this case that keeps resurfacing decade after decade, and the part that connects directly to the title of this video. Years after Monroe's death, a man named John Minor, who had worked as a deputy district attorney involved in reviewing her case, made an extraordinary claim. He said that Dr. Greason, her psychiatrist, had allowed him to listen to private audio tapes recorded during Monroe's final therapy sessions. According to Minor, those tapes contained Monroe's own voice, discussing her state of mind in the days before her death. For decades, Minor said nothing publicly. He claimed Greason had sworn him to secrecy. It wasn't until Greason had already died, meaning the one man who could confirm or deny the claim was no longer around to speak, that Minor went public with what he said were transcripts of those sessions. And this is exactly the kind of "someone finally broke their silence" moment that has fueled endless fascination with this case. A man who sat on an explosive secret for years, who only revealed it after the key witness could no longer contradict him, presenting words that supposedly came from Monroe's own mouth in her final days. But here's the twist that most viewers never hear about. Minor's credibility did not hold up well under scrutiny. Investigators and biographers pointed out serious problems. The original tapes he claimed to have listened to were never produced. He was, and remains, the only person who ever claimed they existed at all. A biographer who personally knew Minor later said she had significant doubts about the authenticity of the transcripts he released. It also came out that Minor had, at one point in his career, lost his professional law license for a period of time. He had reportedly misrepresented some of his own professional history to people who later tried to verify his claims, and strikingly, he had gone through bankruptcy shortly before selling the alleged transcripts, raising uncomfortable questions about motive. So did someone truly break decades of silence to reveal Marilyn Monroe's final private words? Or did a man with a documented history of credibility problems construct one of the most convincing hoaxes in Hollywood history? To this day, nobody has definitively answered that question, and that uncertainty is exactly why this story refuses to die. You cannot tell this story honestly without addressing the political weight hanging over it, because Monroe's life in her final months was deeply entangled with two of the most powerful men in America, President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Rumors of relationships between Monroe and both Kennedy brothers had circulated for years before her death, and by the summer of 1962, associates say her connection to the Kennedy family had turned cold, possibly abruptly. Some biographers argue Monroe felt discarded. Others claim she was growing frustrated, even talking about going public with details of her relationships that powerful people desperately wanted kept quiet. That backdrop is exactly why her final phone call, the one mentioning the president, carries so much weight. It's why conspiracy theories linking her death to political figures have never gone away. Books have been written directly alleging that Robert Kennedy was involved in silencing her to protect his family's political future. The Kennedy family and their representatives have firmly and consistently denied any such involvement. There is no confirmed evidence proving Kennedy family involvement in Monroe's death. But there doesn't need to be hard proof for the theory to survive. There just needs to be enough unanswered questions, enough missing time, enough conflicting witness statements, and one very famous, very unresolved phone call. When news of Monroe's death broke, the reaction across Hollywood was immediate and raw. Legendary actor Laurence Olivier, who had worked closely with her, said publicly that she had become a complete victim of hype and sensationalism. Director Josh Logan called her one of the most underappreciated people in the entire world. Her funeral was held just days later, and it was deliberately small and private, attended only by her closest inner circle, a stark contrast to the global fame that had defined her entire adult life. But outside the funeral, the public reaction was anything but quiet. Newspapers ran the story for weeks. Fans mourned in the streets. And almost immediately, questions began circulating about whether the official story was the full truth or a convenient one. Every few years, this case resurfaces. New books claim new evidence. New documentaries promise fresh interviews. Just last year, a newly released collection revealed previously unseen material from one of Monroe's final in-depth interviews and hundreds of unpublished photographs from her last professional sessions, proof that even now, more than 6 decades later, previously unseen pieces of her final months are still surfacing. That's what makes this case different from a typical Hollywood tragedy. It isn't static. It keeps producing new fragments, new claims, new voices insisting they have the missing piece, and every single time, the same unanswered questions resurface with it. Why did Eunice Murray's story keep changing? Why is there still no explanation for the missing time between when Murray says she found trouble and when authorities were actually called? Why were the minor tapes never physically produced by anyone other than Minor himself? And why, whenever her final phone call comes up, does the mention of the president get treated as an inconvenient detail instead of the biggest clue in the entire case? None of these questions have official answers, and as long as that remains true, this story will keep resurfacing, keep dividing biographers, and keep pulling in new generations of people determined to figure out what really happened in that house. 6 decades later, the official file says probable suicide. The public has never fully accepted that word. And the people who were actually inside that house that night took most of their answers to their own graves, leaving behind nothing but conflicting statements, a disputed set of tapes, and one haunting final phone call that ends with the words, "Say goodbye to the president." Whether you believe this was tragedy, cover-up, or something in between, one thing is certain: this case is not closed in the eyes of history. And every year, someone else claims to be the one who can finally prove what really happened. If new evidence comes out, if new documents surface, if anyone else steps forward claiming to have the missing piece of this puzzle, we will be the first to bring it to you. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us, because the last chapter of this story still hasn't been written.